Good morning everyone. My name is Swastika Singh Chandel and I am from Faculty of Paramedical Sciences, Rama University, and my today's topic is Ascaris lumbricoid. So before starting with Ascaris lumbricoid, let's recall about its family. So basically the Ascaris belongs to family nematode. So this family means the general characteristics of these families is they are elongated, they are cylindrical in shape, unsegmented worm with tapering end, so that they are having tapering end with unsegmented worm. They are bilaterally symmetrical and free living, found in soil and water. So before starting with these characteristics, I would like to draw one diagram. So this is basically a worm, adult worm. Adult worm means this is having a rounded shape from anterior side and posterior side is pointed. If this is pointed, you are seeing a bilaterally symmetrical, that means it is divided into two parts, bilaterally symmetrical. This is called as bilaterally symmetrical. So this is bilaterally symmetrical, this is anterior end which is rounded, and this one is pointed posterior end. So this is basically free living parasite and found in soil and water and usually this type of parasites are seen in rural areas much than other areas. So now let's talk about classification. So what is the classification? Basically this nematode family is divided into two parts. Number one is on the basis of habitat, and another one is on the basis of zoonosis. So before starting with on the basis of habitat, this is usually divided into two parts, that is small intestine and another one is large intestine. So now starting with large intestine and small intestine, some parasites like Ascaris, Trachinella, the infection is usually seen in small intestine, and starting with large intestine like wipeworm, strongyloids. So these are being seen in large intestine. So the classification is basically recall this in two parts on the basis of habitat, and next one is zoonosis. Before starting with habitat, they are basically divided into two parts, that is large intestine and small intestine. Now the large intestine we are having two or three, more than three. They are Ascaris, Trachinella, and in large intestine they are called as wipeworm and strongyloids. So now just come to about the morphology. What is the basic morphology? So this was about the nematodes family. Now let's come to the morphology of this Ascaris. So before starting with the morphology, I would like to say that these Ascaris is also known as roundworm. This name round belongs to this hook-like structure, this rounded hook-like pinpoint structure. This why it is called as roundworm. So the name basically nematode means nematode. Nematode means nema means thread-like, and this toad means worm. So nematode all it belongs to a thread-like worm which is known as Ascaris. So now let's talk it about this Ascaris lumbricoid. This is roundworm and have been described from very ancient times. So this has been described from very ancient times, but rarely this causes infection and usually causes infection in rare areas with poor sanitation, with having rural areas. The infection is more commonly seen in these areas. They are usually common seen in rural areas with having poor sanitation. Approximately 85% of persons which are being suffering from this disease are from rural areas. So the adult worm usually lives in, as I already tell you, that they, on the basis of habitat, this parasite is belonging to in small intestine. So these are the parts of small intestine. Ileum, jejunum and duodenum. So basically in these areas, approximate 85% of parasite is seen in jejunum part and rest 15% of parasite is seen in ileum part. Otherwise short enough is seen in duodenum part. So this is the differentiation, the whole parasite which lives in this small intestinal area. Now let's talk about, this is basically the large intestinal parasite. Which is the usually very large in size among all the roundworm, all the nematode family parasites. So now starting with the morphology of this Ascaris lumbricoid, we just recall three things. Number one is adult worm, number two is eggs, and number three is larva. So before starting with adult worm, this adult worm is basically divided into two parts, that is male adult worm, and number two is female adult worm. So moreover, we are talking about now these eggs. These eggs are also being divided into two parts, that is fertilized egg and unfertilized egg. So all the parasites which come under this nematode family having three stages: adult worm, eggs and larva. But in case of Ascaris lumbricoid, adult worm and larva are seen, but larval stage are not seen. Adult worm and eggs are seen, but larval stage is not seen in this parasite. So now let's talk about adult worm. This adult worm is divided into two parts, that is male adult worm and female adult worm. Now number two is eggs. Eggs are basically divided into two parts, fertilized eggs and unfertilized eggs. Now just tell about what are adult worm. Basically all the adult worms of this family is of this basically parasite, that is roundworm or Ascaris lumbricoid. They are large cylindrical worm with tapering ends. This having tapering ends with posterior tapering and anterior one is rounded in shape. Okay. Now pale pink in color, they are having pale pink in color when freshly passed in stool. After some time in contact with environment, the color changes and it becomes a white color, milky white color appearance after some time when it comes to the temperature, normal temperature, that is environmental changes. Okay. Now mouth of the at anterior end, they are having the mouth which is anteriorly and posterior end is having with tapering ends. This is anterior end having three lips. With these three lips, it can be divided into one posterior end posteriorly and two ventrolaterally. Now with the posterior end we are having anal areas. Now just recall it about what are adult worm. Basically what are adult worm? So adult worm are basically smaller than female worm. Female worms. The male worm is slightly shorter than female worm. The most important and most common thing in this parasites, basically adult worm, male worm is slightly shorter than female worm, and the posterior end is ventricle to the form a hook like structure. As you can see this is saying that the posterior end is showing the hook like structure so that it can attaches to the small intestinal area. Now the measurement, let's talk about the measurement. The measurement is about 15 to 30 centimeter. As I already tell that they are large intestinal parasites, yani ki they are large in shape. So if they are having large in shape, so the measuring is about 15 to 30 centimeters and 2 to 3 micrometer in diameter. So the length is basically 15 to 30 centimeters and the diameter is about 2 to 3 micrometer in thickness. Okay, now just all about female adult worm. The female adult worm is larger than male worm. This is larger than male worm. The size is approximately 15 to 40 centimeter, or we can say 30 to 40 centimeter in length. And now we are just talking about the width. So this is 3 to 6 micrometer in diameter. So female worm are larger than male worm and their thickness and length is about 30 to 40 centimeters in length and 3 to 6 micrometer in diameter or thickness. The single worm, the special characteristics of this parasite is a single female adult worm can lay approximately 2 lakhs eggs per day. This is the criteria. 2 lakhs eggs per day can be laid out by a female adult worm in approximate 1 day. Yani ki per day you are having 2 lakhs of eggs per day that can be laid out. Now just talk about what are the eggs. So eggs are basically divided into two parts, that is fertilized egg and unfertilized egg. So the fertilized egg is infective form and the unfertilized egg is non-infective. That means the infection cannot be happened by this unfertilized egg. This fertilized egg is infective form and it can cause many of the infections. Okay, now we are just recalling all this. So the nematode is basically belongs to Ascaris, belongs to nematode family. As their general characteristics is they are elongated, cylindrical, unsegmented worm with tapering ends. They are bilaterally symmetrical, free living found in soil and water. Their classification is about two types. Number one is about on the basis of their habitat. They are being divided into two in large intestinal area and small intestinal area on the basis of zoonosis. Number two is on the basis of classification divided into zoonosis. Now come, let's talk about morphology. Our main topic is Ascaris. Now let's talk about the morphology of Ascaris. I already tell that they are bilaterally symmetrical with tapering ends on one side and anterior end having 3 lips on the anterior end. So this is also Ascaris called as roundworm, and this is the largest intestinal parasite. Now this morphology is basically divided into 3 parts. All the parasites of this family divides into adult form, eggs and larval stage. Adult form is divided into 2 parts, male and female adult form. Eggs are divided into fertilized eggs and unfertilized eggs. So male adult worm is having slightly shorter than female, and the length is 15 to 30 centimeters, and diameter is about, or we can say width is about 2 to 3 micrometers. So now the female adult worm are larger than male adult worm, having 30 to 40 micrometer in length and 3 to 6 micrometer in diameter. Now let's talk about the life cycle of this parasite. So now let's talk about the life cycle. This involves only one host. Only one host is required for the life cycle. Infection may also be transmitted through contaminated drinking water and food water. So the infection can be also be occur by contaminated food and water. Now let's talk about the life cycle. Before starting with the life cycle, I would like to recall this. This is basically the life cycle of parasite. So as I already told you that this parasite is having only one host. The entire life cycle is complete in one host, and the infection can be basically developed by a contaminated food and water. So starting with this life cycle, firstly it enters to the mouth of the man, then it ingested, the eggs are ingested in the food and soil. Man ingests egg in food and soil by the help of food and soil. Now its infective form develop within egg and soil. Now it comes to fertilized egg passed in feces. Now adult form in the intestine. This intestinal adult form travels to esophagus, esophagus to trachea, trachea to lungs, lungs to venous system, and venous system to intestine, and basically it then passes to the mouth of the man. So this is basically the life cycle of Ascaris lumbricoides. So now let's recall about the pathogenesis. Usually 2 types of disease is being caused by the pathogenesis, or we can say this by the Ascaris lumbricoid. Number 1 is Ascariasis, and number 2 is Ascaris pneumonia. So these 2 disease can be caused by this parasites. Now let's talk about the lab diagnosis. The lab diagnosis include microscopy, number 1. Number 2 is serological examination. Number 1 is microscopic examination. Number 2 is serological examination. It includes 2, antigen and antibody examination. Number 3 is imaging. Number 4 is culture, and number 5 is diagnosis and number 6 is molecular methods. So, before starting with this lab diagnosis, these points must be remembered, that is microscopic examination, serological examination, which is having of two parts, antigen and antibody, and now imaging, culture, xenodiagnosis and molecular methods. So, these are the points under which the lab diagnosis has been covered of Ascaris lumbricoid. So, this was all about, in short, about the Ascaris lumbricoid. This is also called as roundworm. Thank you and have a nice day.